Malcolm, we talked when we start about compliance. So some organizations are, just complying with health and safety. So how, in your opinion, we can moving from the operational and complying agenda to a strategy agenda to make it influence in the markets that we are operating?
Wow, that's a great question. First thing, and we can have this as a discussion. I don't think any health and safety professional should ever think that they cannot comply with the law. Right? It doesn't matter whether we agree with the law or whether it actually reduces injuries or anything like that. So, and I think if we don't comply, then what happens is we immediately don't have credibility with the employees. So I think the basis for some companies that try to work on, they call it safety culture, work on this, that, and the other, and yet the employees know that they're not in compliance with guarding regulations or personal, but oh wait, there's no credibility. So I think it's very, very important. And I think you need to have a strategy of compliance. To actually think that everybody complies 100% with all the legislation is not the case, right? There's always deviations or deviations over time, even with the having the mindset of we will comply. So it's constantly important to check, have a strategy to make sure we know about the changes in legislation, we know about how they affect us. After that, and I think at the same time, you can embark on a strategy that takes you to putting in place some basic tools that are going to drive you forward on maybe risk assessments. It could be behavioral-based safety. It could be anything, right? Whatever you think is going to work and tailor to your organization is then to put in the strategy of how do I put this in place, right? If you're dealing with a single site, that's very easy. You just decide you're going to do it, right? Or maybe you decide, oh, it's not this year, it's next year because of budget, which impacts your strategy. When you're dealing with a global organization with different cultures that are different stages, then you have to have a more flexible, adaptable type of strategy. That when one site is still struggling, maybe with the first steps, then you have to accept that. You can't turn around to them and say, you're really bad, you're not very good, and all the rest of it, because this site is better than you, and it's much, much better. You've got to accept them where they are, get them to accept where they are, and help them take the next step on the journey. So the strategy, a real good strategy, allows the flexibility to be modified and adapted to each individual site that you have, right? But you have to give the frame. So very often what we do in our sites, we turn around, we have global objectives for certain, which are sort of things like all manual handling training needs to be done. You need to be at 100% on the life program, that kind of stuff, right? And that we apply to every site worldwide. Then we have some that are more flexible, that they adjust as a function of where they are in their journey. So different sites will have different objectives, right? And they're managed locally. And the strategy allows that. But the first thing is risk management. I don't care all the fancy terms of all the rest of the stuff people want to do. You've got to get your risks under control, your high risks, your medium risks. Then you can start to talk about fancy things like visible felt leadership, culture development, this, that, and on the other. But the first thing is that you've got to secure, you've got to protect the people. And then you allow the sites, all my sites have since 2010, I've had a 5-year strategy, all right? And so it changes every about 4 years. We sit down with the EHS leadership, the line management, or whatever, we change the strategy. The last time we developed strategy for 2030, right? And so it's a 7-year strategy. And why 2030? Because the business developed a 2030 strategy. So I'm aligning with the business.
Perfect.
And there we went out to approximately 200 EHS leaders worldwide. We brought our consultants in that do our risk audits and said, okay, do a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly of where are we missing. We also interviewed people, and about 40 people, EHS professionals, said, based on what you know about L'Oreal, what are you doing that L'Oreal can learn from? Or what is L'Oreal not doing that you think we should be doing? And based on that, we created our 2030 strategy, which is totally and utterly flexible to a site now to say, okay, this is where I am today. This is where L'Oreal expects me in 2030. I now build my roadmap and my action plan. And you can now have different sites that are working on different programs, right? There's no compromise on life. There's no compromise on where we can have serious accidents on NFPA worldwide, for example. There's no compromise on that. But on these things, we can compromise because it's evolution of the foundation that each individual site has. And it works. And you know something? It empowers the EHS people on the site to make decisions. Because one of the problems that you have when you have a culture like we have is if everything's top down, then where's the creativity and the innovation that comes from the site level? There isn't any. It kills it, right? Because I'm telling them this is how you do health and safety. But what you need to have is a system that allows them to, once they've evolved and they've got the basics in place, then they can take ownership, right? Then they can be creative, innovative within the frame, right? And that adds value. They feel valued. The work for our professionals becomes meaningful, right? And then when you do that, guess what? Everybody goes the extra mile.
Yeah.
Everybody goes the extra mile. And you know, our most successful program talking about this kind of thing, Safe at Work, Safe at Home again, right? When we launched it, it was a logo and a mindset. There was no KPIs, there was no roadmap, there was no nothing, right? And it's probably the most successful program L'Oreal has ever deployed. So it's a bit of everything. It's a bit of everything, but it's not easy. You know, if I had a single site or 5 or 10 sites, I think you could have a common strategy and deploy it, and maybe they're all in one country, so country, or maybe 2 or 3 countries. It's easier. But when you're in 147 countries with all those different cultures, well, as you know, Megan, from your days, you're a Pepsi or Coke.
Both.
Both.
I work for both.
And you work for both. I knew it was both. But you have to have that flexibility, right? And what a lot of senior people do at EHS, they very often leave it completely to the sites, right? And my experience is that doesn't really work over the long term, right? You get significant deviations. For example, I don't know if you've heard of the ATEX regulations in Europe. It's the explosion regs, right? It's like the PSM regs in the United States. I apply that worldwide because it's the best. So you take something like the US standard, they find the differences between the US standard and the European standard, and I apply the European standard, right? So that they upgrade it. If you go to a country like Korea, there's nothing. So they apply the European standard when it comes to explosions. And the simple reason is why we globalize on that kind of thing. And we have NFPAs worldwide as well, because there's no difference in the value of somebody's life, whether they're in Brazil, Argentina, China, Korea, or France. So why shouldn't organizations like L'Oreal globalize on these kind of things, irrespective of the cost that's behind it? Which it's easy for me to say, I work for a company that does okay financially, right? And I've never had a challenge on budget, and I know other people do. But I think big international companies should globalize, because you can't put a different value on somebody's life. You can't say in the US we'll have NFPA because that's the US kind of standard, but we'll put nothing into Korea, for example, because there's no standard. It doesn't work.